And Yonda, would it be helpful if I sent over a distribution list of the committee just so you could cross compare? I'd be happy to do that.
Yes, that would be fabulous.
Okay,
And
I'll do that.
Just being here because Jill will be taking over sending out agendas and everything. So, so yes, please do. Thank you.
Okay, I will do that. And I'll send you a list of the roll call too, so you have that.
Just real quick, was there was a call yesterday that I missed, or was it one that I wasn't on?
There were.
Oh, okay. All right. Never mind. Okay. Fair enough. Thanks.
Okay. I can go ahead and call the meeting to order if you'd like, unless you want to wait a few more minutes, and then I can do roll call, and then I'll turn it over to you, Yonda. Would that be helpful?
That's fine. Thank you.
Okay, great. So it's 8:04 a.m. I'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. Good morning, everyone. I hope that your morning has started off well. I'm going to do a quick roll call. This is Sally Bolin. I am present. Representative Rodney Creech.
Here.
Alex Lapso.
Here.
Representative Stephanie House. Representative House. Amelia Jackson. Debbie Pearson.
Here.
Joe Russell. Joe Russell. Okay. Leanne Smith.
Here.
Yonda Smith, or Yonda Snyder, I'm sorry. I have that done. I'm so sorry. I'll fix that. And Jean Thompson.
Here.
Pete Van Runkle.
Here.
Senator Steve Wilson.
Present.
And I'm sorry, Leanne Kingsbury, add you to my list too.
Here, thank you.
And did I miss anyone? Okay, all right. All right, I'll turn it over to you, Yonda.
All right, thanks so much, Sally. So we have tried to be busy squirrels over the course of the last couple of weeks, and really still feel like there's some open questions and some open issues that are still to be determined, but we are starting to get some answers and direction. So I thought what I would do today is share with you an important update, although noting that there are still going to be some missing details. Talk about kind of what this means for the project as a whole and activities that we will be carrying out. And then we do have a point of discussion for the last portion of the meeting that we would like to get some input from the group on. So let me kind of start with the update. And I'm happy to see Alex and Senator Wilson on this call because the update really has to do with a conversation that we had last week with Director McElroy, Senator Wilson, and Leader Yuko. And we had shared with Director McElroy, our concerns that the due date of August 5th for a final report was, as you know, quite challenging. And we indicated that we could do a report with the task force by August 5th, but we had real concerns that that report would be lacking. Certainly it would be lacking a great deal of data, particularly data that had been vetted by the task force itself. It would have been really missing robust public input and the voice of people affected by dementia. And it would have probably resulted in recommendations that had largely been plucked from more general best practices, as opposed to recommendations that had been through a process that would result in potential solutions tailored to Ohio's unique needs and the state of dementia care and services in Ohio. So that was something that we had shared with Director McElroy pretty close to the end of our first week on the project. And subsequently, when we met with Senator Wilson and Senator Leader Yuko last week with Director McElroy as well as Alex, we discussed the possibility of extending the timeline for this project. And I would say we have what I would call sort of an agreement in principle to turn this into a multi-phase process with a first phase of the project still with a deliverable due date of August 5th, but that deliverable is really going to be focused on findings. And our hope is to make that a pretty data-driven report with, facts and figures, as well as a picture of the impact of what that means for people in Ohio. So that report would then tee up a second report that would be much more robust, much more built around recommendations, more likely to have, we're still working on the public input piece, but more likely to have robust public comment as a part of that report. What is in question is what the due date of that report would be. We had, in speaking with, Senator Wilson and Leader Yuko, they indicated that, whether it was weeks or days, that timeline could extend, in the vicinity of 90 days, plus or minus a little bit. ODA has indicated, Director McElroy has indicated a preference for 90 days, but that hasn't been finalized. So we are, going to hopefully get an answer on that question Friday, and that request will be made formally. I don't know what those processes are because I'm not an Ohio legislative expert, but Senator Wilson made clear that because the legislature adjourns June 25th for the summer, any request for an actual extension will need to be made in advance of that date so that the legislation can be amended to allow for the extended time frame. So again, some open questions, but we do believe now that we're looking at a two-phase report with a first report. And I hope you remember from last week's discussion, we really began trying to redirect the discussion a little bit to findings, because one of the things that we had sort of observed from meeting with the groups is that there was probably, due to the timeline, there was a real push toward the recommendations piece and less work that we had observed around findings, particularly findings that were rooted in data. We felt like that would result in a report that wasn't what everybody was telling us they wanted in that report. And that's a large part of what prompted that discussion. So let me pause there and ask if anybody has any comments or questions just about that piece of the update.
I think that makes a lot of sense, personally.
I do too. I think it's impossible to think that we can get all of this done by August 5th. I mean, I think most of all the people in the call, there are lots of other focuses they're working on too at the same time.
Yes.
I would agree. And I think and I don't mean to speak for the committee, but I think we were feeling pressured of time even before you joined. So about how we get this done by August. So.
Yeah, and we certainly have observed that the committees themselves all have sort of different flavors and personalities. And, all three of you have brought as groups very different sort of strengths and weaknesses. But what we have definitely observed is, one, there's a huge amount of enthusiasm for this, and we want to capitalize on that with, hopefully, without creating task force fatigue in the process, but begin to, maybe get this moved along, but recognizing that, you have felt under, a great deal of pressure, and we appreciate and understand that, and hopefully don't exacerbate that situation, knowing that, even separating the report into 2 phases is still, those are not easy phases. We're still talking about cramming, 18 months worth of work into about 10 months. So okay, so then let me kind of move on to the next phase of information that I wanted to present to you. And noting, I always have to put the disclaimers out there. There are open questions, and I'll walk through kind of what those open questions are. But the big thing that we have to accomplish is figure out now, what does that change mean? If we presume a 90-day extension, what does that mean for our timeline with meeting schedules and how we work with the committees and with the task force? A big open question that is relevant to that is around the review and approval processes. The date of the final report is August 5th. But the task force has to vote on the report. ODA has to go through an internal review and approval on the report. We're not completely certain that we have a good understanding of how those 2 processes work together. And as you can imagine, if the task force has to vote on it before ODA needs it for review and approval, and ODA has indicated they would want that by July 15th, then the only full task force meeting that we have is June 28th. And that means that we have basically 3 weeks to create a draft for the task force to approve at that meeting. Now, we'll work with what we have to work with, but we are trying to get a handle on exactly how that process is going to work, because I think we would all agree that we want to maximize the time available and for discussion, for conclusions, and for the drafting process. So, we believe that between now and the final deliverable, i.e. the second report, we need to accomplish the equivalent of 6 to 8 task force meetings. Now, we have sort of treated this week, for example, by meeting with the 3 committees as the equivalent of 1 task force meeting. And we may take that approach for a few weeks because the committee meetings are largely scheduled. But there will be a point in the not too distant future where we will engage with the task force and with ODA to talk about the possibility of extending meeting times or having more frequent meetings, because there's a lot of discussion that needs to happen between now and a final report. And that timeline, again, is just so dependent on, our ability to work with the groups. So what we do see for sure in the next several weeks is a multi-track effort. There are several different task trains that are starting down the track, and they're going to be running concurrently. So let me kind of walk you through what those are. One of them is just the track of committee meetings and using this time in a robust manner to have some pretty focused conversations to develop findings for the report. And then subsequently to do the same thing with these groups for the recommendations piece. Another train that is starting down the track is about data collection. There is, in many cases right now, a pretty heavy reliance on anecdotal information or general information. And so we have begun conversations. We had a really good meeting last week with ODA. They pointed us in the direction of some really good data sources. We are making some specific queries of ODA, and we are reaching out to the Department of Health as well to actually get some data that we can use in this process, both for writing up findings, as well as data for the committees to use to flesh out your findings, to give some structure to some of your findings discussions as we go forward. So stay tuned. We should have some data to start to share with you in next week's meeting. And the meeting will be focused around facilitating what that data is telling you, what it means for Ohio, and building some findings out of it. It may also create more questions about more data that you're looking for. We understand that's a possibility. But that is one of the tracks. Another one of the trains that is on the track is just additional ongoing research. Another task train that is running on this crowded railroad is task force member interviews. We recognize that the meeting schedules aren't always going to give us the best opportunities to meet with or to get input from all of the task force members. So and many of you possess very specialized subject matter expertise. You're all here for a reason. And so we are going to be starting a process where we are reaching out to the majority of task force members individually, conduct interviews with you that are more specific to dementia-related findings in your area of expertise, what you know and contribute information-wise to this effort. And then the last task that is, among the most important, these are all important though, is the task of drafting the report and understanding that, we really have to start drafting this week. We're drafting a little blind, but we do have to start drafting. That's actually something I want to put a pin in because that's what we're going to talk about. But what I want to do before we start actually talking about drafting is, again, I want to pause here and ask, I sometimes get going and moving along, so I want to pause here and ask about any comments or questions you have as a group. And again, bearing in mind, we still have some open questions. So my response may be, we don't know yet, but we will hope to know by Friday.
My comment to you, Yonda, goes back to where you started this part of the discussion with these timetables, and I would just hope that, I guess the way I would see it in sort of taking, stripping away some of what I would say is sort of bureaucratic stuff. If the report is due 8/5. The preliminary report or whatever findings report, it would seem to me that we need to try to do everything we can to make those approval dates as close to that as possible so that there is more time for the actual work to be done. So I don't know why why the Department of Aging would need, 20 days to review and approve. And to think that the task force, let's schedule another meeting of the task force, on August 1st or something, just enough time for you to be able to make any changes that were necessary because of that discussion and review. I don't think we should make the existing schedule, kind of drive everything. We should make, the point of this is getting a good product. So you should have the most possible time to develop a good product within, obviously, the statutory piece that we have to deal with, and not let other, pre-existing schedules kind of impinge on that. That's my take. But
and I do agree. And we, of course, want to have as much time as possible to meet and discuss with the group and to draft. I would note that having been a State Unit on Aging director that has been subject to similar reports, it's a reality that there are internal review and approval processes. We did a major report in Indiana in 2017, and we thought we had all kinds of time. And then all of a sudden, they wanted almost 3 months of review and approval because of all the different people within the administration who wanted to review it. So 2 weeks is not an unreasonable time frame, but we are dealing with a tight time frame overall on the project. So any effort we can make to extend that, we hope to work with ODA on that.
I guess I would just add that given that this very compact time frame, et cetera, I think one thing really important, at least in terms of our committee, and I'm going to assume in terms of the other committees, is that as you've looked at everything, we really need to narrow and define what the capacity committee needs to come up with. I think we sometimes get a little, I guess it really goes back to my comments that the capacity committee is about what, in my opinion, is, what capacity do we have now? What capacity will we need? I mean, I think in order to be able to produce something that has meaning in this short time frame, we need to define really what the charge of our committee is. I think dementia care brings out so many, at least in terms of the capacity committee, brings out so many feelings by different members of the committee and the whole task force, actually, that sometimes we're trying to do more than we realistically can, and is the focus of what our committee has been charged to do.
That is a really interesting question, and it is. That is kind of a factor in the conversation that we will want to have with you shortly. But we have struggled a little bit with the committees in that, the legislation is organized one way. It's got 3 buckets, and then there are items that fall within each of those buckets. And at least for the capacity committee, you've got some pretty clearly defined, capacity was a bucket. Now, the committee's structures, though, don't line up with the legislation. They don't really mirror those buckets. And the other thing that we have observed is that in many cases, the committees are having very similar discussions about, or actually, I would say they're having some very different discussions about very similar topics. So, workforce and training are among the ones that I would bring forth first and foremost. And we have been a little concerned that that the structure could lead to, 1, duplicative effort, but 2, different outcomes for similar topics that it would be harder for the task force as a whole to sort through. So that is actually why for the next couple of weeks, we're not as focused on committee-specific charters. We're really kind of trying to look at the committees more as a subset of the task force as a whole and move some things along, knowing that in your perspective as a committee member with a particular area of focus, that may inform your contribution to the group. Knowing that the people who are on the science committee largely bring a science and data-driven approach to what they do. The people who are on the experience committee are the committee that has brought a great deal of work to how do people experience this? Caregivers, people with dementia, workers, and you as a capacity committee have been working already on, what is the capacity in the system? We're just going to try to harness that all together. And it does mean, so let me kind of begin to transition a little bit here. That question has actually, before we can really start drafting a report, we have to have a little bit of a framework for that report. And we have bounced some ideas around and we have heard some ideas, but one thing is fairly clear. We're not really sure that we can frame the report in the committee structure. So we can't necessarily frame it with a capacity section, a science section, an experience section. it's not wrong. It just is not probably optimal given some of these topics that cross lines. We can frame the report straight up and down through the legislation. That is one approach, that can be taken. That feels a little bit like a check the box exercise. Gets the job done, but does it really tell the story? And I think that's something that everybody wants to do here, is really tell a story and use the data and information to make that story compelling. And so one suggestion has been to use sort of the journey of people with dementia as a framing device. And that would mean, like, sort of starting with prevention and mitigation efforts, detection and diagnosis, caregiver and supports and services, to long-term and acute care. We want to use this time with the committee to get your input. We did this with the groups yesterday, but we want to facilitate some discussion with you as a group by talking to you individually here to get your thoughts about what you think these reports, or really this report, should look like. And I would note that we're not talking about writing half a report and another half a report. We really are talking about writing a findings report that stands on its own as a report of the picture of dementia care and services in Ohio, and a second report that will be bigger and will come with the recommendations, but it will stand on its own as well. They relate to each other, but they're different reports. So the question is, what do you want this report? What do you think you might want this report to look like? So with that in mind, what I'm going to do is take a breath, shut up, and turn it over to Leanne so she can sort of facilitate that discussion, because I talk too much.
Good morning. Thanks, Yanda. I was going to add a couple of pieces of information around the different ways we can gather information and the way we want to use the existing committee structure that we hope is helpful for you as a group. And one piece of information is, as you know, we have Jill with us, who I bow down to her every day because she's so good at capturing the conversation and the notes and the minutes, and I always find that incredibly helpful. So one. And Yanda really said this, and so I'm going to sort of reiterate it. We want to take those kind of responsibilities off your plate. We don't want you to have to worry about the scheduling and the coordination and the note taking and the sort of process management of this. You all come to the table, as Yanda said, as content experts, and though we certainly also come with some expertise, our role here is to really elicit and gather your expertise. And so we really want to use this time to hear from you, given the role that you play and your expertise, and obviously specific to capacity. I thought Jean's point and sort of question or intent was really an important one, and that is, what is the actual purpose, and have we sort of defined it? And as Yanda said, we're seeing lots of overlap between committees. That may not be a bad thing. I think that gives us a set of information. When three different committees talk about the same thing, it gives you information that says that is clearly an issue, that is clearly something that's important. It's something that is weighing heavily on people's either sort of minds or work. So I think that's useful as well. The other thing is, we will, going forward, and this will evolve a little bit, but we will design a facilitation process so that we come into the calls, the meetings, with a structure that we're going to use for that day. and it won't change every time. So we'll have some process that we can sort of jump into pretty quickly. We will do our best to try and ensure that everybody has an opportunity to join in and add information if they want to. Some folks will probably choose to listen, and that's okay too. And we'll just use some kind of structured facilitation processes. Start off with some basic meeting agreements. How will we interact? How do we manage our time? How much time do we have, and what questions are we trying to answer, et cetera. And you all will have that information to the best of our ability. You'll have the question or questions, the topic that we'll be talking about ahead of time. So not that any of us have time to do this, but so that hopefully you'll be able to come into bless you, Sally, you'll be able to come into the meeting at least sort of knowing the question that's on the table and maybe having had a moment or two to give it a little bit of thought. So for today, we'd like to just hear a little bit about, have you already given some thought to, do you have some thought or some ideas around the framework, as Yanda was talking about? Let me just look at time. It's 8:33, so we have just a little less than a half an hour. 8:33 my time, Eastern time. Do you already have some thoughts? Have you given thought? Have you had any conversations about the way to frame this this report? Now, obviously, we're separating, so we have really two reports: the findings and recommendations, but as Yanda said, we've heard a variety of different ideas. I think probably the strongest, if you will, that we've heard that seems to resonate the most is this finding some balance between really telling the story, the state of the state, but not just a numbers report. If we just hand you a numbers report, there are a few folks who will just relish that, and there are a whole lot of others who will go, yeah, it's numbers, right? And if we just tell the story, that experience of Ohio and people living with dementia and families supporting and caring for people with dementia, it's a powerful, powerful story. But there will equally be people who will say, yeah, but tell me the numbers. Where's the data? So we think that probably what we're aiming for is some balance there that sort of draws people in. Stories tend to really lead change efforts, but you have to really manage that change with good data. So I'm just going to use my participant list and the way it shows up on my screen. I don't know that it shows up the same way on everybody else's. And ask folks to weigh in. Let me just tell you what the list looks like on my screen, so you know kind of what I'm going to be doing and kind of where you are in the order. I also want to make sure I don't miss anybody. So I have Jean, and then Joe, and Alexander, Leanne Smith, Pete, Representative Creech, Sally Bolin, Representative House, and I think it looks like Stefan. Oh, I'm sorry, that's Representative House showing up twice. Okay, am I missing anybody?
I think Representative Wilson is I think. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, I was thinking that.
Yes, you did name it, but that's all right. I'm kind of the one receiving the report, so I'm here to listen and interject and process. But as far as information gathering, you are the experts, not me.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm gonna start with Jean and just ask you if we've got probably about a minute or so each. That'll kind of get us a little bit of time at the end to kind of wrap up. So Jean, did you have thoughts already on sort of that framework and how we might share this information?
Well, in listening to you all this morning, I guess what I'd say, I think a blending of the journey with the data that's available to us is probably a pretty good concept. In doing that, just as the journey of the disease itself has stages, we have to look at what we're doing as a state, which has to even be divided between that's just more generalized public support, programming, etc., that would be done. I mean, one big component in all of this is how do we support people? How do we support people who cannot do much financially on their own? How do we support people who are going to require state financial support and assistance as they move through this journey? I mean, I'd be very interested in finding, and I don't even know who'd have that information, even if we get numbers of people with Alzheimer's disease and dementia. I don't know that I've seen it broken out into early stages, middle stages, and later stages, because each of those kinds of stages creates its own levels of needs. So, you know, I am for doing that, but I think it's important to look at the stages of support in terms of public support that's general and to all caregivers available in the community, those things, moving to more intensified support that may require state interjection or interaction, even financially, and then maybe in some more ultimate, which that information would be really interesting too, I don't know that I've ever seen how many people can actually, you know, I'm with assisted living and we have lots of dementia care facilities. How many people who have dementia can actually afford on their own that kind of placement? How many would require a state assistance to afford it at that later stage?
Thank you. You know, I think the other thing I hear, Jean, and I suspect other people will say something similar, is we're not exactly certain yet what the priorities are. And I think we're seeing that across committees as well. So I think that's another piece of this is really, and that's really, really important fodder for future conversations. So great. Thank you so much for that. Joe Russell, you are next on our list. Good morning. Joe, you're still muted if you're saying something.
Oh, I apologize. I hit the
There you
wrong
go.
button.
That's all
Turn my
right.
camera off instead of unmuting myself. You know, I've been looking at this process more about the sort of the broader view of how we can get more services to people, and then also through the scope of how do we you know, allow more people to remain in the community as long as possible. But through this process, I felt very humbled because there's sort of a lot more experience in this group, and not just in healthcare, but also in this topic area than I've been able to bring to the table. I think from my perspective, I would kind of defer to some of the other folks about sort of the direction of this, but I definitely agree that the work that's being done is going to get us to a place where it's going to have a discernible impact on the people and people's lives. So I don't really have much more to add than what's already been added, but I really appreciate that you guys have come to the table and are kind of steering us in the right direction.
Well, thank you for that. We hope it's the right direction. That's our plan. Thank you, Joe. Alex, you're next on my list. And Alex, you're still muted if you're saying something brilliant.
Leanne, Alex may not contribute as a member. In fact, some of these questions are with him. So
Okay. Great. Thank you for that. Leanne Smith, you are next on my list.
Good morning. Well, certainly I agree with everyone else's comments, you know, the previous comments. I, again, kind of bring a couple of different perspectives to this committee and having personal experience, you know, with my mom, and then also work experience with this. So I guess from the beginning, when I thought about this task force, and I was honored enough to be asked to serve on this task force and be a part of this committee, in my mind, I just kept thinking, we just have to help people. There needs to be more help and more support for people along this journey. I can't honestly sit here and tell you exactly what that might or should look like, but I have always thought, and no offense to any facilities or any other, situations that are happening out there, but I always thought personally, there's got to be a better way. There's got to be more we can do to help these people. So that being said, I feel like that needs to be financially, again, affordable assisted living care, as I think Jean had mentioned. How do you, when that time comes and you can no longer keep them at home, how do you make that affordable for people so that they're getting the proper care they need and deserve, frankly. And then also the emotional piece of all of that. So offering the emotional and the financial support for that. And then again, just if more services to allow them to stay home longer, if that's possible. So I don't necessarily know that what I offer here today gives you direction for your report, but those are things that I would say need to be considered and need to be that emotional piece of how this affects so many people and how this will affect so many people down the road really needs to be driven home with how this report is kind of structured and finalized.
Thank you. I think it does. I think that really contributes to that possible vision of, finding some balance between creating a picture of the state, but really telling the story. And Leanne, a quick question, just so I make sure that we're clear on exactly what you mean. When you are suggesting we have to help people, you are thinking both people who live with dementia and care partners and care providers, caregivers?
Yes.
Okay, just that I assumed as much, but I didn't want to.
Yeah.
I didn't want to assume. That's always dangerous. So
yeah.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
John. I just want to respond briefly to something that Leanne just said, and she talked about our report. And I just want to underscore with this group that this report is not our report. It's not Sage Squirrel's report. It's a report of the task force. Mm-hmm. And so we are here to help you guys synthesize your knowledge, synthesize your experience, synthesize some data into a report that really is about, as Leanne says, the state of the state in Ohio. And I didn't want to let that pass because I don't want you guys to not feel a deep sense of ownership of this work product and to know that you're here for a reason. We're just trying to draw your input out and put it together in a way that tells the story that you want to tell.
Thanks, Yonda. Okay. It's a really important point, and it really speaks to the importance of our language and communicating that, because this will be a report, obviously, from all of you going forward, and we want to make sure that it is seen that way. So thank you for that. Pete, you are next on my list.
Thank you. And as I was thinking about this, and I had the benefit of being, further down the line, which is always helpful. Excuse me, because you get to hear what other people have to say. But in my mind, I go back to, why was this legislation passed in the first place? Excuse me, darn it, a little dried out from too much coffee. And the purpose of the legislation certainly was not to create a group and have a group have a bunch of meetings. The purpose of the legislation, in my mind, was to identify needs that exist in the state of Ohio and to come up with ways to address, to quantify them. So going to data, and then to make recommendations of how to address those needs. So it seems to me that the report, your question was about how do we structure the report? And it strikes me that it should be needs-based. It should be based on, okay, here are the needs that we've identified as a group, the whole task force, because obviously we've all been dealing with different pieces and parts, and then some discussion about that, quantifying or data analysis of that would shed light on the needs and the existing ability to meet them, and then and then going on to explanation of from the people, kind of how they have described and are emotionally attached to those needs. And then later, I guess, in the second version of this, second iteration of the report, we would get to, well, what are the recommendations for meeting the needs?
Thank you for that. And I will just warn you that the order will change each meeting, so you won't always have the benefit of being halfway down the list. Thank you for that, though. I appreciate that. Representative Creech, are you still with us? There you are.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add. I can tell you I've just appreciated being a part of this group. I've learned a lot and looking forward to the report. I'm probably the one at the table with the least amount of experience, but I appreciate you educating me, and looking forward to the final product here.
Great, thank you so much. And Sally, you are next on my list.
Okay. I think probably what I could add is, I had thought that, the findings report was, I think Pete actually summed up pretty well, so I won't repeat what he said, because that was what my impression of the report was. I think maybe to add a little bit more to that is when we talked as a group, I think, we spent some time, numerous times, kind of scratching our heads, I think, trying to figure out where is this data going to come from, what's available out there, is it reflective of Ohio? Because I know we talked about some things available, looking at some other state models, which is great. But I think we want to make sure in the report it's reflective of what people in Ohio need, because certainly, I mean, even if you look at the roles of AAAs from one state to the next, it's very, very different, right? And so then that trickles down from a service standpoint. I like the idea of having a report that includes stories and data. I think a combination of both, because I think that gives you a nice picture then for people to relate to. So I think that's a great idea. But I do think it does need to reflect what currently exists in Ohio. I think we spent some time talking in some of our meetings too, is talking about where this data is coming from. Is it really reflective of today? Because I know as I looked and tried to pull some things, some of the information, seemed a little out of date for me. So I think that's important. And we also talked as a group too about, I think as we look at capacity, or we look at what's available, is in the state of Ohio, some things are captured very, very well, and other things aren't so much. So I think in the report, we could emphasize, because we probably do know the number of, assisted livings and nursing facilities that are available. But there's other, I think, services that are out there we don't have such a great idea of. And so, making sure that, we double cross and check that. I like the idea of it reflecting the trajectory of the disease, from, pre-Alzheimer's, so prevention and subjective cognitive decline all the way through end of life. I think that's really important. So I love that idea. And I think that it's if it's realistic from a time frame, even to maybe do some focus groups and, really go out to family caregivers and individuals who have the disease and people who are working in the field and asking what it is that they need, if we're really wanting to look at needs, because I think things have changed a lot since the pandemic. And I think that, while we're getting through it, I think it's going to be interesting how it's changed some of our values as a society, or how we even go about our day-to-day lives anymore. And then what does that mean for dementia care? And I know, being in this field for, going on close to 3 decades now, what I think people might have, I'm not so sure anymore about, just given, what's happened in the world in the last, 15 months or so. So hopefully I added a little bit more without replicating what people said. So, and I think I'm past my minute. Sorry.
You're fine. We're doing fine. You're good. Thank you very much. Very helpful. Thank you so much. So the last 2 folks on my list, Representative House and Representative Wilson. So Representative House, welcome.
Yes, good morning. So in listening to the conversations, things that I would just add, I know Sally touched on it a bit before, but as we go through this process, everybody talks about data, but really trying to maybe even put a vision out of what more real-time relevant data would look like, so that we would be in a better position to see trends and then be able to act and invest appropriately as things are happening. Also, I always think about the majority of people who will be, I would say, serviced or, are connected to, Alzheimer's and dementia-related diseases. For the most part, some of them never will ever touch the system in the traditional way, right? Through some type of facility. And so the overwhelming majority is out in the community. And how are we able to facilitate or make connections specifically in a culturally appropriate way? And that is one of the things that I know is severely missing in our system. And I'm just talking about just being a Black woman growing up in a poor community. Like it's like people aren't talking about this. This ain't their thing. They're just not going to be connected to this system in this way. But they need that help and support. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. But figuring out how do we create ways that can actually be a relief to people, that are really just going through some tough times, so that they, have great lives and all that type of stuff. So that's just my 2 cents.
Thank you. Actually, that is, I think, a huge component of this. If you look at how communities and people of color, people of faith, people of different faiths address caregiving and care for family members, it's dramatically different. The needs may be very similar. The need for care may not be dramatically different, but the way people approach it. So I think that's such a critical point, and thank you for bringing that to our attention and making sure that we keep it on our radar. I appreciate that very much. Thank you. Representative Wilson, would you like to add anything?
Well, thank you. Yes, I would. And what I would encourage everybody to do is remember your audience. Remember who we're writing the report for. Remember that they don't have the depth of knowledge that you have. They have very differing levels of experience with this. And the whole idea of the report is to say, what is Ohio going to need to meet this looming, and I'll say crisis, of increased dementia and increased Alzheimer's? And what money are we going to need? What legislation is going to need to be passed to change things? What are the reimbursement levels that are necessary just to keep in business the support systems that will be needed? So I guess if I would add one thing to all this is, don't forget your audience. You're not writing this report to other people in your industry or in your expertise area. You're writing it to people who don't understand, need to understand, and need to understand what the needs are going to be.
Thank you. And I apologize. I believe I said Representative Wilson and I should have said Senator. I apologize. Thank you for that information.
It's never a problem. You can call me Steve if you want. That's fine.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. I at least want to get it right in the beginning for sure. Have I missed anyone? Did anybody join after we started? Did I accidentally skip anyone who has not contributed who would like to? Okay, I'm going to assume nobody's on mute and we've gotten everybody. Thank you all so much for that. I will just tell you really quickly, I don't know if you can see this, if it'll show up on my camera, but when I take notes, I do it a bit visually. So there are all these little bubbles all over my notepad right now of kind of topics and priorities. And Jill is absolutely our note taker, but it helps me to write some of this because I can remember then what people have talked about and who has said it. And it's a really helpful way for me to facilitate. So I have all sorts of bubbles all over my notepad here. Really important information, and I think will really help us, help guide us in this. I'm going to hand it back to Yonda and Debbie to see if there's anything you'd like us to do as we wrap up. Thank you all very much for sharing your time today.
I think we're good, and I appreciate everybody's contribution here. We do have notes. I will ask Jill if she heard any action items. I don't think I necessarily did today, but let me put the inquiry out.
The only action item that I have is for Sally, and it's just simply send Sage Squirrel the distribution list and the roll call list.
Okay. All right, thanks, Jill. We will. We've got some procedural questions with ODA, and one of them is, since we're going to be taking over the notes and the minutes, you know, how those like flow out from us and to ODA for posting purposes. We've got to make sure we've got a handle on that. But we do have the minutes or the notes from today's meeting, and those will be shared with you. And I think that's all that we have. So Sally and Leanne, I'll turn it back over to you guys for adjournment.
Okay, I guess just one quick question that I had. We will be meeting again next Tuesday at 8 a.m. Is that going to be kind of a standard to keep on our calendars for now?
For now, yes.
Okay.
And we would be thrilled if you would entertain the notion of extending this to an hour and a half, but we understand that everybody's schedules are very busy, but we do hope to bring to you some data next week and, you know, have a pretty active discussion about what that data is telling us, what other data do you want, keep this moving forward.
So is that something then that I'm assuming you're asking us to put on our calendars next week, at least to plan on an hour and a half, or moving forward an hour and a half? I just want to make sure we all.
Is that a possibility for this group? I think that's probably, you know, each group has their own schedule. Everybody has their own constraints. We are respectful of that. But if you can do that, it would be helpful to us. So yes, I guess that is the question for the group, if you would be willing to extend your meeting by half an hour.
I'll just say that I can do that in all likelihood for the next 3 Tuesdays, but may not be able to for those Tuesdays in July.
Okay.
Yeah, I should be able to as well, but I will also have a couple of conflicts, I think, in July. I'm still home this morning, so I don't have my work calendar right here with me, but I will do my best to make those hour and a half commitments.
That works for me too. I would agree. I might have a couple, but it should be fine.
Okay.
Yep, that works for me as well.
Thank you.
Same here.
Okay.
Thank you. All right. We'll work with ODA to update that invitation to reflect that, and I think we're through for the day. Thank you.
Great.
So,
We'll officially adjourn. Thank you. Everybody have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
thank you.
Hey, Jill, can you stay on for a minute so I can get your email address, just so I don't, please?
Absolutely.